All right. Good morning, Doug. We've got some Q&A for today. Let's go ahead and jump into it. First one is from someone in Norway. They say, why is it common for you to say that money goes to money heaven when a borrower defaults? For example, suppose I borrowed money to purchase a house and I default on the loan. That money is in the hands of the seller of the house. So it isn't just vanish. How come, how come that is not a contradiction? Is this question.
That's actually a very shrewd and pertinent question. Uh, it would not die and go to money heaven. Uh, I mean, in reality, look, in the days when we use specie as money, which is to say gold as money or silver as money, the money doesn't disappear. It just changes ownership. Okay, so I think that's the nub of the possible confusion here. In a free market society where where specie is used as money, it's not going to disappear. It's just going to change ownership. It's different today, though. Uh, let's suppose you're in a town and there's just one bank, and the bank has a certain amount of capital and it makes some loans. But let's say this bank runs on a fractional reserve basis, where after it loans the money out to a farmer or a storekeeper, uh, he's basically going to redeposit most of that money back in the bank so he can write checks against it and so forth. And people that he writes checks against will deposit it back in their accounts. Okay, that's fine. But suppose it's a fractional reserve bank. And since everybody's redepositing their money in their bank, suppose he figures, I can actually lend out 90% of this money because it'll get redeposited too. And I'll be able to earn interest on the additional amount that I create since it's a closed system. I don't know if I'm being clear about this at all. So uh, now we're talking about credit money as opposed to specie money, tangible money. And if a debtor defaults, well, what happens to that money? It's not specie money, it's credit money at that point. So it does die and go to heaven.
Part of
And of
it,
course, when you have a national bank, a central bank, it does the same thing on a national scale. It all has to do with credit money. Okay.
right. And essentially it's like, it's leveraged on basically a 9-to-1 basis because it's something like that, right? Because of what people are allowed to loan out. So like when if you're a debtor and you don't repay the money back to the bank, then, well, yes, that's true that technically the seller still has the credits in his account, but that bank has, it's your repayment, the basis of the counting on your repayment, believing that your repayment is going to come in for the principal owed, they have went and lent out more money to people, 90% of that money again, essentially to others. And then when you don't pay that back, essentially it causes that a cascade of levered debt, right? To default.
Yeah, it works real well for the bank early on because it's collecting a lot more interest on the credit money that is created and lent out. Gee, that looks pretty good. But then prices start rising, people get squeezed, all the free money makes them do crazy things like they're doing now. And it all comes unglued. So that's a technical way it dies and goes to money heaven. But I guess in a kind of a philosophical, comedy quip, you can say, yeah, it dies and goes to money heaven. It turns to spirit money. It's no longer real anymore. So
Of course, this money never really was real money. It always was
never
spirit
was,
money.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
So we have a couple questions that ask about real estate, and so I'm just going to summarize them in one question rather than go into each one. One is from New Zealand. I know there's another one from Singapore. Both of them are very similar situations where, they have a lot of equity now in several properties and one in New Zealand again, and another person in Singapore, and they're wondering if they should sell at this time. Is it time to sell and then take that capital and redeploy it the New Zealand guy asks in maybe in a mortgage-free farm, um, or or something else. And the Singapore one says, the thing is with maybe the Singapore market will continue to go up because of all the Chinese billionaires. But all in all, they want to know if you should sell.
Maybe it will, but once again, that's a really good question. I remember I wasn't in Singapore at the time. I was in Hong Kong at the time, but I think it was 1986, and I forget what it was that happened in Singapore, where the real estate market really collapsed there. I mean, they were giving stuff away back in '86. And I said, gee, maybe we should be in. Anyway, look, that would have been a great time to buy in Singapore, which is actually almost exactly when I bought in Hong Kong. So I'm trying to think, what was it that was going on in the Orient at that time? Okay, now we're at the mirror image of this, and the ducks are quacking. Give me real estate. I want to buy real estate. I don't care what I pay for it. It's a good time to sell. And I understand too, because I haven't been back to New Zealand now for years, but I did a lot in property in New Zealand. Actually owned a lot of property that I bought and sold. But when I bought in New Zealand about I don't know, 1999 or close to 2000, that area, the Kiwi dollar was like 38 cents US, and now it's like, what is it, 68 or something like that. And property prices in New Zealand were really cheap in Kiwi dollars. But now I think it's got one of the hottest property markets on the planet. So, same with Canada. And I think the same with Singapore. So it's a good time. If you like to buy cheap when nobody wants it, this is not the time to buy or even hold. Now's the time to sell. The problem is, what are you going to do with the money? That's the problem. I think it's the time to sell, but what do you do with the money? Do you leave it in the bank? Maybe not a good idea. A lot of these banks are going to be bailed in, so big depositors are going to get screwed. And of course, all these currencies are being inflated out of existence, so you're going to be losing that way. So where should you put your money if you sell the real estate? And that's kind of the only reason why, I'm cautious about selling real estate. It is a place to hide, even if it drops a lot in price.
Yeah, but like you said yesterday when we covered investment mistakes, having cash from when you make a big win on some investment and keeping it in cash where your powder is dry to be able to take advantage of the huge opportunities that do come along, but not often, but they do come along where there are obvious wins, was a valuable thing. So if you don't have, especially if you don't have cash that's dry powder, then it seems to me that you would definitely want to take some off the table.
Yeah, it's a real problem today more than ever, because in the past, you could have reasonable confidence in the stability of the currency, reasonable confidence that your banks are going to be okay, or the government insurance will bail it out. Things have actually changed fundamentally in a lot of ways. The sands are shifting right beneath our feet. So I'm not so sure the old rules work quite the way they did before.
Okay. Next question is, you once said in a video that America makes it nearly impossible for countries to be tax havens anymore. Could you go into more detail as to why exactly that's the case?
Right. It's not that the U.S. is going to punish that country directly. It works with the banks. The thing is, look, it used to be as late as the 50s, or actually as late as the mid 60s, that you could get on a plane with $1 million cash. I mean, obviously I never did it, but you could. And it was basically no questions asked, or no rules against it, transporting giant amounts of cash around. Well, now, of course, if you move more than $10,000 in or out of just about any country in the world, there's all kinds of reporting on that. That's the direction that things have gone. But I think the answer to the question is that the reason why Americans in particular, and I don't know how many other countries there are like this, but the reason why Americans in particular have a very hard time opening up bank accounts in other countries around the world. Why? Because the dollar is the world's currency. Basically, all major transfers across borders, even between countries that don't use dollars, they're done in dollars. And it's done through the SWIFT system. And if you're a bank that is seen as being naughty or breaking US laws by not filling out all the forms and so forth with American clients, uh, you're not allowed to do business with American banks or use the SWIFT system to transfer dollars. So now what are you going to do?
Right. It's basically a death sentence for banks if they don't submit to the regulatory regime of the US.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And it's worse than that. If a bank is still showing that it's recalcitrant and trying to get around the laws, then if any of those bank directors or officers come to the US, they'll probably be arrested.
Hmm.
So it's it's a bad deal to be an American today, or a bank that's dealing with Americans, because it's just going to be a giant, expensive, risky pain.
Got it. Okay. So in a previous episode a while back, you mentioned knowing the leader of the Hells Angels, and this viewer is wondering if a lot of the members of the Hells Angels were ANCAPs.
Well, I don't know a lot of members of the Hells Angels. I just know Sonny, but I can tell you something about their culture, uh, and that is that they're not. Look, they're cultural conservatives. They're traditionalists. You know, they believe in God, Mother, the military, apple pie, the flag, that kind of stuff. Okay, that's the ethos of the Angels. That doesn't mean they're ANCAPs at all. It means they're kind of sympathetic towards, 1950s free market style values and stuff like that. Yeah, okay. But basically, a lot of these guys are just thugs and criminals. Let's admit it. I mean, a lot of them are. That's why I've got so much respect for Sonny, because he's a very smart guy. But it takes a special kind of character to keep a lid on 5,000 hardened bikers like that. So you can have a really good conversation with Sonny, because he's a very hip guy, and he understands these principles. But the organization he runs, they're traditionalists, okay, not ANCAPs by any means.
Okay. Someone asked how our recent trip to Mexico was, and this was you were speaking at a conference there. Specifically, they're curious about your thoughts on Mexico. As is it a better option than places like Brazil or Uruguay, Belize, or Costa Rica?
Yeah, I know Jeff Berwick, of course, really likes Mexico, and his wife is Mexican. He has a great time down there. If you watch his podcast, which he does about as frequently as we do ours, a couple, 3 times a week. So yeah, he's sold on Mexico, and I certainly enjoyed it the last time I was there in Acapulco. It was nice. But where do you go in Latin America? The problem with Latin America is that ever since day one, things can change radically on a dime at the next election. I mean, places can go from being great to being horrible overnight, all with an election, or sometimes even a revolution. I mean, and sometimes there are just cultural shifts, like Chile. That's an interesting. It was a very popular place, very justifiably popular. Beautiful California climate. I mean, delightful place. It's like California South is what it is. But they elected Allende, who was actually a communist back in 1970, and then Pinochet assisted him in shedding his mortal coil, and the place boomed for the next 30 years as Friedmanite free market values, and it transformed from a backward mining province to the by far the most advanced country in Latin America. And now, oh, we had it too good for too long. So now they've elected, I don't know who this person is, but very socialist. And look at Peru. Peru was, you know, um, everything from the Sendero Luminoso to strict foreign exchange controls, they free marketized. But and a lot of the problem with a lot of these countries is that the natives, the Indians, the American Indians, that I mean, they're getting together, and after 500 years of integration with the European conquerors, they've decided that they don't like the Europeans anymore. I mean, this is like a hint of a race war building up in places like Bolivia and Ecuador and Peru. And Ecuador was very popular with gringo retirees for a long time. It seems like that's changing. So, Colombia seems to be changing. Venezuela changed, very quickly, most prosperous country to, the shithole of South America. So it could happen to Mexico. Costa Rica is very stable that way. It's the most European. They don't have the Indian problem. They're almost all Europeans in Costa Rica. It's kind of interesting, but it's very expensive. It's kind of overrun with Americans and Canadians. I don't know. I spent a lot of time in Costa Rica. It's okay.
Is there
Panama? I think Panama is probably going to stay. Probably going to be probably okay, but look what happened with Noriega. I mean, these places are all unpredictable. The culture is just such. They don't have the traditions that we had in the U.S. and to a lesser degree in Canada.
Well, and those traditions are not keeping us from making, serious mistakes, or Canada from starting to look like, East Germany. So
exactly. It gets back to the question of exactly where do you go? I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I ask myself that question all the time.
All the time. Yeah. Is there a place in Latin America that seems like it is less likely to, suffer those huge transitions in the near term? I mean, that is just has a semblance of stability. Like you said, Costa Rica has, it's pretty stable.
Well, or Uruguay. I mean, I love Argentina. I really do. But I wind up spending most of my time next door in Uruguay, frankly, because, it was actually one of the first socialist countries in the world when socialism started actually getting traction as a philosophy back at the turn of the 19th century. The first three socialist countries were Sweden, Uruguay, and New Zealand, actually.
Interesting.
And, they're all kind of like democratic socialists. And Uruguay's gone through some tough times. They had the generals take over, and they killed a few hundred people back in the time when the Argentine and Brazilian generals were killing people too. So I think Uruguay in South America, probably, it's a farming country. It's basically Kansas by the seashore.
Small population, relatively speaking, right?
Small population, widely spread out. So it's, I think Uruguay is not a bad bet. It really is. But like I said, anything can happen. Listen, nice thing is that they had a doctrinaire socialist, Pepe Mujica, who was president for, 5 years, 4 years, I forget. And he was kicked out, and the current guy is business friendly and not, not really a doctrinaire, not a socialist. He buys all the democratic nonsense, but he's not a thief. So yeah, they can change things there. Uruguay's, and listen, southern Brazil. Talk about Brazil, giant country. I mean, southern Brazil is really different from northern Brazil, and I like southern Brazil a lot. Right next door to Uruguay, but Brazil is even more regulated and crazy rules and taxes than Argentina, which is saying something. That movie Brazil, uh, I mean, it was actually a kind of a realistic spoof.
Hmm.
So
It's a great movie. That's probably from, is that, would you say that's early 80s? It's kind of sci-fi fantasy.
yeah, sci-fi fantasy is what it was, but
Yeah.
sci-fi fantasy based on reality. The
Yeah.
culture hasn't changed much, I don't think.
Okay, cool. Let's see. Let's see. Next question is from someone in Brazil who says Albert J. Nock used the term economism to describe the philosophy where one views the whole sum of human in terms of the production, acquisition, and distribution of wealth, saying, quote, I have sometimes thought that here may be the rock on which Western civilization will finally shatter itself. Do you think he was right? Why has Western civilization overly concerned themselves with the material gain at the expense of other pursuits like spirituality, art, or morality?
Well, I gave a speech um, about a year ago on what Western civilization is, why it's different than and better than any other civilization in the world's history. And not just a little bit better, a lot better. Not just like several orders of magnitude better and different from anything else. So I'm a huge fan of Western civilization. Not that I don't like things about other civilizations, but look, it's all about the material world, okay? The material world, which means stuff and being able to do things with stuff and having the freedom to do that. No other civilization. Look, the Oriental civilizations are, have some wonderful aspects. I mean, other than the food, which is nice, and kind of a mellow culture, and Buddhism and Taoism and things like that. They're mellow, but I think he mentioned. I saw that question that you sent me, and if you live in the West, you can engage in any kind of spiritual practices you want. I mean, it's up to you. You can be any of these things. You can live in a monastery, but if you live in the Orient, in the wrong place, I mean, if you better not, if you're in India, you're probably better off being a Hindu because they're wild and crazy that way. So you've got a lot more freedom to practice spiritualism or art. Sure, but the best art in the world, frankly, is all in the West. The variety, quality. Yes, I like a lot of Oriental art, but nothing can compare with the West that way. Everything. The West is the best. Ayn Rand said it very accurately. She said, East minus West equals zero. That's not quite accurate, but pretty much.
Interesting. Okay, so let's see. What does Doug think about scientists and medical professionals? I mentioned a couple, like Brett Weinstein, just to name a few, who have been censored for questioning the party line. People have talked about different drugs that they could use to treat COVID, things like that.
It shows that the basic principles that made the West what it is are being thrown out. That something like that can happen because one of the guiding principles of the West is freedom of thought and freedom of speech and freedom of inquiry, all these things. So it's criminal what the media and the governments and the powers that be are doing to people that don't share their views on the nature of COVID and the vaccines. I mean, it's something that should be discussed and debated as opposed to canceled.
Right.
It's criminal, actually.
Yeah, it's a scientism replacing science, really.
Exactly. Yeah, the science is replacing actual science.
Right. Science is it's the pursuit of it's testing ideas to find the truth, right? It's actually forming a hypothesis and then trying to disprove it. And
Yeah, science is a process, not a thing, really. If
right,
you look at it that way.
exactly. Okay, so next question regarding the discussion surrounding the potential for a breakup of the U.S. or an outright civil war, would this require a division between the generals and the armed forces to occur?
That's, you know, I currently, I used to know a lot of military guys, uh, a lot of military guys, and I don't know what's happening right now, other than what I see on television or read. But it appears that the top generals and admirals, they're a bad group. I mean, they're all very collectivist oriented. And it's been that way for some time. I think the last high ranking general I met was Barry McCaffrey. If you recall, Barry was the guy that blew when the Iraqi army was heading back north. And the tanks had their guns turned facing the rear, saying, "We surrender, we surrender." He basically, turned that highway into, they called it the highway of death. I think that's a war crime, frankly. Anyway, I met Barry at a cocktail party in Washington at some embassy just after he got off being drug czar. And it was a very unpleasant meeting where, as we were leaving, he said, "And I'll have you arrested." Those were his final words to me. I kid you not. I kid you not. That's what he said. Because I made some comment about drugs, saying, "Well, how do you know that I don't have several ounces of cocaine on me right now?" And that's when he said, "If you do, I'll have you arrested." And I said, I didn't tell him to fuck off, but I rolled my eyes and just walked out. That was the end of the party.
Amazing.
Anyway, these generals, I think it was always this way, more or less. But the character of generals as a group seems to have mutated over the years from guys like Eisenhower and Bradley and Patton and people like that, where they're all very politically oriented. And in today's world, to get to be a general or an admiral, you have to be a political operator who is mainly good at backslapping and backstabbing. And these guys all seem to have collectivist ideas. And the idea now that they all want to get all the troops vaccinated, which is kind of a way to separate, potential Trumpers or Republicans from, the Democrats. I mean, your views on being forced to be vaccinated is pretty much a dividing line. So you kick those guys out, the military is going in the wrong direction,
Yeah,
radically, I think.
I think so too. And I think that people wonder if, there's going to be mandatory vaccination in the US. And I think, who knows, based upon the statements that are coming out of the White House, it certainly could happen, but it would happen first in the military because when you join the military, you basically sign over your life to them. You fall under a whole different body of law than other American citizens might fall under, that the rules that apply to you are totally different. And, if they ordered you to take that, you'd have to, or you could be court-martialed. So you could be in prison. So that's the easiest group for them to do it with. And if they haven't done it with them, yeah, it's unlikely they'd do it, more broadly. But if they do it, then that could be other things.
And there's other things that I've seen. I don't know how widespread these things are. It's that, they had people dressing up in high heels and stuff like that at some military base to show that they're friendly to trans and gay people.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, was that a one-off? Was that a one-off with the crazy base commander, or is that kind of becoming widespread? I mean,
It's hard to know. And if anybody here is in active duty military, let us know in the comments. Like,
yeah, I'd really be interested in knowing what's happening on the ground with guys.
yeah. So the question is, would it require a split in the armed forces for you to have a breakup, or would it not?
Well, look what's happened to the Oath Keepers, which are military guys, but also police. I mean, they're on the ragged edge of being labeled a terrorist organization, actually, at this point. So
So
I
maybe
don't know what would happen if I was, I'd have to, well, look, I couldn't have made it anyway. I would have had to have resigned long time. I would have been kicked out long ago. Forget about it. It's that
run
kind
back.
of question. I don't know what guys are going to do. I mean, their mission, they don't know what it is. Or are we peacekeepers or war fighters? The whole thing, it's part of the general degeneracy of the US government and the West at this point. I'm sure that the Chinese and the Russians look at these antics going on in the US military and they just roll their eyes and laugh. They can't believe it.
Yeah, in fact, there's a Russian recruiting video where there was this clip I saw. Lots of our viewers have probably seen it too, where basically it's a recruiting ad for the Russian military, and then it switches off to a recruiting ad for the U.S. military, and it's got these like super masculine like special forces guys jumping out of planes at nighttime, and like just totally kicking ass and taking names, and then it's got the girl who basically said that she was inspired to join the army because of her two moms and
Oh
whatever.
yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was hilarious,
Yeah,
hilarious and pathetic. And I don't see how it's going to get better. On Tucker Carlson, which I watched the other night, he had an admiral on, or he showed some congressman interviewing an admiral about this book written by this Looney Tunes black professor.
Ibermex Kendi.
Yeah, what is this? Do all the Navy guys have to read this book? I got that impression.
Yes. Yeah, it was on his book list.
Yeah, and it's a Looney Tunes book.
Well,
very destructive and stupid.
Right. The admiral says something about I don't know if it was an admiral, but it was maybe I'm not sure, but he was a high-ranking military officer. He said something about I think it's important for us to think about think about the sources of white anger, as one of the terms he used. And I was like, I thought the military is kind of supposed to be like not white anger, but anger. Like it's basically supposed to kill and destroy things. So it's like it's as long as it's channeled well, I think that's kind of actually the whole point of the military.
Yeah, we're living in bizarro world. Everything increasingly is upside down and backwards.
So what are the chances that a real John Galt appears in the world?
Yeah, who might he be? In our last novel, Assassin, I did with John Hunt, we have a character that, because he's very wealthy and has the right values, decides he's going to take a shot at being the president and so forth. And that's one of the most interesting, in my view, sub-themes in a book about assassination, which I'll do I don't have a copy. Oh, I do have a copy up there in back of me. One of the few books in my library, which is going to start filling in because the rest of the books are going to start arriving this week. So I get to impress the hoi polloi with a whole bunch of books in back of me now soon. But yeah, so so we have him, and he's kind of a John Galt character. But I don't want to
spoil it.
I don't disclose what happens. But in today's world, if John Galt became president some way, if he didn't kowtow to the Praetorian Guard that would give him a sit-down talk, I think he'd be assassinated, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yep. So very low chances that this person appears in the world today.
Yeah, or if he appears, that he'd last long. Because of course, first the media would jump on him and all the corporate, the usual thing. I mean, yeah, it could succeed in today's world, but chances are slim and none, and slim as out of town.
Okay.
So maybe after the Great Reset, if it doesn't go the way Klaus and pals hope, but we're outgunned. quite frankly. People that think in libertarian terms, I mean, we're a rounding error on the general population, I think.
Yeah, and the other thing is the captains of industry seem to be more captured right now by the state than maybe they were in Ayn Rand's book, because there were these people who were really shaping the world and creating the world, these industrialists who were driving everything. It was their attempt to capture their industry that was part of that encouraged them to basically check out. But it seems like that's already happened somehow. The captains of industry today are, all in Davos right now. So they're already involved with it.
And I thought when computers were really starting to become a big thing in the 70s, for instance, and the early 80s, I thought, a lot of these computer guys are basically libertarians. I mean, that was the reigning ethos, I think, among computer jocks back in those days. But it's not anymore.
Nope, long gone. Okay, so a couple of people recently watched your interview with Donahue, where you're on for a full hour in, I think it was 1980, was it?
It was 80. It was the day before the national elections in 1980 is when it was.
Got it. So one of the questions someone had about that was, what originally precipitated your opinion that people should not support political parties? Because you said we should not vote for them or encourage them during.
Yeah, well, it's because I didn't believe in politics as a way of people relating to each other. I mean, you can relate to other people voluntarily or coercively. Those are your two logical possibilities, how you're going to deal with the world. But politics is all about coercion. It is. It's about, I'll hold a gun to your head, I'm the government, and you'll do as you're told. That's has nothing to do with convincing people. Sure, they try to convince people. It's called propaganda. But it's a philosophical view. It's not a political stance. And incidentally, in the Federalist Papers by Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, I think were the three authors. So it mentions factions. They're always talking about factions are a bad thing and so forth. And it's so rare that anybody says, well, what are factions? I mean, these are groups of people that who are factions. That sounds bad, factionalism. Well, that really is political parties. Factions are political parties. It would be so much better if in translating the words of the 18th century to today, they said, well, that's what you used to call a political party, was a faction. Right. It would perhaps put the idea of political parties in bad repute. But look, political parties are by their nature corrupt and awful. I mean, look at the Libertarian political party. I mean, it's nothing but a little toilet bowl where creatures are swimming around in it because they get eaten in the Democrat or Republican parties. So they swim around in the Libertarian Party, which has no principles at all, as evidenced by their last candidates, which were William Weld, Jesus. No, I'm very anti-politics in general, and naturally political parties as a result of that.
Got it. Makes sense. Next question. Doug got me interested in oil tankers. What is Doug's broad view of this sector for the next year or two, and what factors are affecting share prices for companies like Scorpio, which, although in an uptrend, are nowhere close to late 2019?
Well, here's the thing. Companies like Shell and BP, and I don't know who else, they're all under pressure. All the big multinational oil companies are under pressure to get out of oil, which is incredible, to not explore for oil, which they're not, and they can't get leases easily for offshore oil or building pipelines or doing anything. So it's like the oil business is almost as hated as the coal business. Mm. But the fact is, oil is necessary and needed it's trading over $70, and I think it's going over 100 in the next couple of years. So I'm very bullish on oil, even though these big companies are disasters. They're run by the same kind of corporate people that run all the rest of these big corporations. They've been infiltrated totally. So look, I think I've mentioned this before, but if not, I'll mention it again. It's that when oil was everybody's darling, that was back in 1980, was actually the peak for oil relative to everything else. And the S&P 500, 35% of the capitalization of the S&P 500 was oil and oil-related stocks, drilling companies and things that had to do with oil. Now it's like 3%. 3% of the S&P 500 is oil. These companies are really very, very cheap. Oil is going up. They're going to make money in spite of themselves. And yeah, and that actually goes double for coal,
Hmm.
which seems like a real contrarian bet. Everybody thinks, coal's a dead duck. It should stay in the ground. Well, maybe, maybe not. And uranium, but oil definitely. So that answers the question from my point of view.
The world needs energy, that's for sure, no matter what. Let's see. Next question sort of relates to it. Have you heard of the idea of a net energy deficit, which essentially is that the cost of producing energy resources, because they're being depleted, the cost of retrieving them becomes too high, and high yielding oil deposits are plateauing, and the fragility of complex societies. It's like takes those concepts and put it together. Have you heard about those ideas? Peak oil, I think, is part of it. And what do you think about it?
Well, M. King Hubbard, who popularized the idea of peak oil 30 years ago, something like that, he gets a bad rap. What he said was that there's going to be a deficit of light, sweet, easy to get oil. That's really what he said. He's a geologist. He understands that at the right price, you'll have a surplus of absolutely anything. So look, it's all a matter of economics. I mean, if you can get the oil out of the ground and for $50 and sell it for 70, you're probably going to make money. So maybe that has to do with energy accounting, not looking at things in terms of currency, but looking at things in terms of energy units in to get energy units out.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But that's ridiculous because, some energy units are worth a lot more than other energy units. That's why we have economics and dollar accounting to decide what makes money. If it makes money, you're creating wealth. If it loses money, you're losing wealth. And you don't have to try to figure out how many calories are in a pound of coal and how many calories it takes to, it overlooks all the other costs and so forth. So forget about that. It's strictly dollars and cents. And people come up with this stuff, they're basically cockamamie socialists the way they think. They don't understand economics.
It's a very interesting point. I've never heard it expressed like that. That's good. So what do you think about global cyber attacks bringing down the supply chain or financial system? Is that a possibility?
It's going to be a major part of World War III because the whole world runs on computers now. Everything runs on computers and chips and stuff. And that didn't used to be the case. So they're the Achilles heel of all advanced societies, and they can be hacked. And yeah, it's going to be that and biological warfare are going to be the two main areas of World War III, the most important ones.
Interesting. Okay. Let's see. Just trying to find the next question here. Doug has stated he believes interest rates will rise, if I understand him correctly. But how can this possibly happen? Because surely we need to accept interest rates will be kept low for many years and invest and speculate accordingly.
Well, I told my little joke about interest rates yesterday.
Yes.
So questioner can reference that joke in yesterday's conversation. But let me ask this. Inflation right now is running not just 5%. I think it's running more like 10% because you can't trust the US government's numbers much more than you can trust the Argentine government's numbers when they report inflation.
Right.
So at some point, people that have their own capital are not going to put it anyplace for a return if they know they're losing like 10% per year. They're going to figure out something else to do with it. So the bond market is going to have to respond to that fact, or there won't be a bond market. So interest rates do have a life of their own. And interest rates peaked the last time in the early 80s at 15 to 20%, even for US government paper. Uh, and they've been going down for over 40 years now. Interest rates have been dropping for over 40 years, just like previously, interest rates have been going up since, well, the mid 1940s when they were very low to the up, down. So there's a certain cyclicality to all this. And interest rates have to go up. And no, of course, the government doesn't want to see interest rates go up for all kinds of reasons, not least of which is they're the world's biggest debtor. But the government doesn't control everything. Fortunately, they try. So
Yeah.
yeah, interest rates are going up, and yeah, that's end of story.
All right. So what are your thoughts on Andorra as a country to move to in these trying times? Do you think Andorra has some merits?
Never been to Andorra. It's in the Pyrenees Mountains on the border between France and Spain. Sounds like a delightful place. Um, gee, I really should go there and take a look, see how I like it. But question is, when you go to a place like that, you've got to ask yourself, well, what am I going to do to earn money? Now, if you have a lot of capital and you're just looking for a place to hang out, probably not a bad choice. A little tiny version of Switzerland, perhaps. But the question is, what are you going to do when you get there from an economic point of view?
Right. And even if you have plenty of money, I guess from a, does it have the merits of a place where you'd enjoy spending the time? Because it's not, people that you, like-minded people or something like that, that you can make it socially acceptable for you.
Exactly. My problem finding a place to live is I like to hang out with people that share certain values and views of the world. Okay. And that's the big problem. There's no place where they really congregate that I can think of.
Nope, generally no. Let's see. Next question is, have you read any books by L. Ron Hubbard? You seem very well read, and you have used Scientology's nomenclature on numerous occasions. I'm just wondering.
I'm a big fan. Here's something that's going to shock and disgust a lot of people. I'm a big fan of L. Ron Hubbard himself. He was a man of many parts. The guy wrote books faster than most people can read them. That's also true, incidentally, of Gary North, who we're going to talk to next week. The shelf of books he's written is awe-inspiring, quite frankly. So that's true of Hubbard. And Hubbard had lots of original thoughts and lots of thoughts that he stole from other people. That's what we all do, stand on the shoulders of other people. So I like, and he said a lot of brilliant things. I'm a fan of Hubbard. And yes, everybody's got faults and all that. I understand that. Absolutely everybody. But let's draw a line there between Hubbard himself and the Church of Scientology, which I have a lot of problems with. And I'm pretty familiar with. I know lots of Scientologists, spent a lot of time with them, gone through some of their processes. I'll try anything once, twice if I like it. And big fan of Hubbard for all of his faults. Not a big fan of the church.
If someone wanted to get to an idea of Hubbard's thinking that you think is really useful, is there a book that you would recommend of his?
A book? No. What is that? It's it's the basic book. What the hell's the name of that?
Dianetics was his most.
Dianetics. Yeah, that's right. I wasn't crazy about that. I wasn't crazy about that book. What I like is is there any particular book that he's written that I've read a number of them that I was thinking stand out? No, because he's got lots of gems in these books scattered about, and in the speeches that he gave. And he's a very good speaker. He's actually a stand-up comedian at his best. Very funny guy, but can't put my finger on anything in particular. You got to kind of pick and choose what strikes you as being especially shrewd or correct or right or whatever. No, I can't. But here's what I suggest. If anybody's interested in pursuing this, this is true in the newsletter business as well. The cheapest products are generally the best because it hooks people in, so they then start buying the more expensive products. It's absolutely true, I think, of the products Scientology has to offer. So go to a church organization, or they're all over the place, and I take the basic communications course. It's a 3-day course, 3 or 4 days, for like 4 hours a day, and really worthwhile. I took that when I said, I want to find out who these people are and what they're up to. So I took that course. It's a fantastic course where you're doing stuff and all that, and it'll give you a real insight. And of course, you'll meet lots of Scientologists hanging around there, and you can assess them in their native environment. So do that. Somebody should take that course and tell me if they think it's as good as I thought it was. And it's only like $50 or $100. I don't know. It's very cheap. But then it gets really, really, really expensive as you go up. And I think the value, my opinion, the value gets less. It's like the newsletter business, or it's like the Catholic Church, for that matter. Take the Catholic Church. Jesus, yeah, I'm a fan of Jesus. The Pope and the Church, not so much.
Got it. Cool. See, you recommend, so next question is, you recommend travel as a great education. What percentage of, Doug recommends travel as a great education. What percentage for someone living in poverty would you dedicate to travel for opportunity and education seeking versus saving, being frugal, and investing for financial freedom, essentially delaying gratification to travel in 5 to 10 years or so? So,
shrewd and excellent question. My answer to that would be, well, look, a very old friend of mine and a dear friend of mine, although I don't see him much anymore, don't see anybody much anymore in these days of COVID hysteria, Bo Keeley. You can go on Amazon and Google his books, Keeley. He's written a number of books. Bo is a professional hobo, okay? That's what he is. That's what he does. I mean, he travels by freight trains. He lives in Slab City in the Mojave Desert in California, which is another story. He's extremely well educated. He's very well, he's the one. Did we have something that told us about his lunch with George Soros?
You shared that email with me about that. Yes, but we didn't.
But that wasn't here on the show.
Oh.
Oh, okay. So how did I meet Bo? I met Bo through Victor. I think I met Bo through Victor Niederhofer, who is a very wealthy and famous commodity trader in New York, who used to work with Soros, just like Jimmy Rogers used to work with Soros, his partner. And Victor, did strictly commodities with Soros. Anyway, so, this is a guy who's a hobo, who's very, very well educated, lives like a hobo because he likes it. He knows all kinds of rich people. And, sometimes if he goes someplace, he's got, very rich guys that put him up. I mean, for that matter, he could stay here with me anytime he wants because he's really interesting company. Well, I'm trying to answer the question about, he's made a decision that quality of life is all about doing things and learning things and going places. And he doesn't clutter up his mind with earning more money than he needs to do what he wants to do, what's important to him. Now, that impresses me as a very intelligent approach. Certainly not the only one. It's not the one I've taken, but I appreciate it. And, you know, so I don't know if that answers the question or not.
Well, uh, it is a choice, but I think that you don't have to. I mean, one of the things, this is a young person emailing in. I think he's 26. It says, at that point in your life, you don't have you don't have much to lose really, but you have a lot to gain. And it's so like the risk reward ratio I think, is favors the bold, favors doing things that are outside of the box dramatically versus just, conventionally trying to work, trade your labor, which isn't worth much. You don't really know that much. You're not really that valuable. Trade your labor essentially for money, save that money when the world is all inflating anyway. It's very hard to kind of get ahead so you can be financially free. I mean, you could end up trying to play that game and never get out of it, like never become
I
financial.
you get trapped in that game is what happens. Easy.
So
The reason I mentioned Bo is that he knows what he wants. And if he decided, because we're the same age at this point, if he decides that he wants to, shed that lifestyle and, plant himself in a comfortable place and get lots of people, I think, would hire him because he's got such broad experience and he's got very good judgment that he's developed. So physical, if not opulence, at least, comfort, it's always at his fingertips because of what he's done. And I look at it that way. And you're right. I think, Matt, it's good to have capital, to have flexibility, but you're not going to save much capital selling your labor in today's world. Best to get the experience and look for opportunities that you can make a hit, catapult yourself that way.
got it. Okay, let's see. Does Doug use any kind of stop losses on his long-term investments?
Depends. It depends.
Yeah.
It depends.
All right.
I mean, who wants to ride something down to zero? That's not fun. I've certainly done it, mostly out of negligence.
Right.
But,
Not paying attention to it. Yeah.
yeah.
Stop having, and especially if you're not hyper vigilant with your portfolio, having some stop losses in there so that, it basically draws your attention to that security, I think makes sense, just to trigger somewhere that tells you, by the way, this is now hit this, 20% below its high or something.
Yeah.
It is easy. It's hard to keep track if you own a variety and you're not checking it regularly.
Yeah, it is. And if you have other interests besides the market, I don't want to stand back on the computer all day.
Okay, let's see. Just trying to skip through here. Can you foresee something like freedom zones developing within various nation states that people can escape to rather than escaping to a specific country?
I think this is happening. And there's some movement towards free cities, where, my hobby is going to shithole countries and talking to their government about radically reforming the country. Well, the free cities movement is doing the same thing, except taking a small part of the country or a city and basically making it a free city. Like Uruguay, perfect example of that. They have, what do they call them? God, there must be a half a dozen of them at least. They're economic free zones in Uruguay, where anything that happens within that is tax-free. The only thing is you can't live. You can't live personally tax-free. You can work in there tax-free, but so things like that are happening around the world. People are trying to create free cities. You think the Uruguayans would figure, since any production other than agricultural goods that happens in Uruguay is all in those little free zones, you think, wait, why don't we make the country a free zone? But no, that never occurs to them.
That's crazy talk, Doug. Come on. All right. So let's see. Next question. Someone asks about family and business. Should a person include a family member in the or the family in a business?
Yeah, that's a real problem. Having lived in Aspen for many years, I've gotten to know rich families and what happens to their kids, and it very often doesn't work out very well. And if you have a successful business, which is how most people make most of their money, is actually a business. Unless you spend time bringing up your son or daughter in the right way, you may not want to give the business to him. He may run it into the ground. And even if you do bring him up the right way, he just may not be interested or oriented towards it. So
Right.
I'm listen, I'm a believer in the Roman model of doing things. Your biological progeny are one thing. That's very nice. But I don't consider my genes to be my friends. I'm just a survival machine for my genes. So to hell with them. I mean, I can view them as parasites. Uh, so I think you ought to have your business, devolve it upon whoever is most worthy of it. Somebody that should be rewarded for their good character and their competence, not rewarded for sharing your genes. To hell with your genes.
Right. At the very least, if you have a family, like if you want to support your family members in some way, the work but they're incompetent at running a business or being involved with a business, the worst thing you can do for their welfare is to actually put them in charge of the business or give them a role in the business if they're incompetent, because you can take capital from the business and support your family members if you wanted to without without hurting the business. So the source of that capital can dry up very quickly if you involve family members in the business. So it actually can be against the welfare of your families if you believe that you have an obligation to your family in some way and that you should support them, which I don't think is
Yeah.
has that obligation. Then the best thing to do is not to give them a role in the business necessarily, but to keep them out of it if they're not worthy of it.
And you might just be making their lives miserable trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
That's another good point. So they'll hate you, they'll destroy all the capital and hate you for it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the people around the business too. I mean, I'm not a big believer in stakeholders, but still, I don't want to harm people unnecessarily.
Right. Okay. So what have you done, Doug, to prep economically and physically to stay safe and survive this wild ride that's coming in the next several years?
Well, I'm diversified politically because political risks are by far your biggest risks today. So I'm diversified politically and geographically. And, both of the places, actually, there's more than two that I hang out, are, well equipped so that if, things fall apart for a period of time, I won't be terribly or dangerously inconvenienced. Let's put it that way.
Okay. What is the greatest physical/mental test you've ever been through?
I don't know. Do you have an answer to that?
No, I mean, I was thinking about this question earlier, and I was just saying that anything the biggest challenges physically and mentally don't have are not usually limited by time. So that's what makes them challenging. So like you could say like an Ironman, running an Ironman race or something, and that would be both physically and mentally demanding, especially if you're trying to beat some time or something. But that is not as difficult mentally or physically, I think, as endurance over a great difficulty over a period of years. I think that's which it's hard to describe difficult life periods as a test. I think it's much more just like pulling yourself out of the gutter. It's not. So I don't know. I can think of these trivial examples, but I can't think of anything. I don't think that those rank, frankly, and anything that's truly physically or mentally challenging.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't think of anything that would be, like, you know, like, Scott's expedition to Antarctica,
Right.
or some of these other Arctic explorers. Now that is physically and mentally challenging. So
Yes.
nothing like that.
Life is full of ease. So, okay, we're going along. So I'm just going to ask a couple more questions here. Someone asks, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek or Star Wars? Okay. Yeah, one of my favorite scenes in the movies is that was it the first Star Wars movie? Is that Star Wars bar? You know,
Yep.
and actually, why Star Trek or Star Wars? Uh, Star Trek is so well organized and everything works, and they got these neat ships, but it's a military organization, and they're all working for the central command, following orders. And you notice that most of the people on the ship could just as well be androids, right? And not like Mr. Data necessarily either. So I would say definitely I'm more towards Star Wars, but I'm more towards Firefly if you want a template.
Yeah, it's a great one. If people haven't seen, I think that, so there's a movie and then there's a series also, uh, right, about that.
Yeah, I like the series. I like the movie too, but I'd see them both. I think the production values are not as high as, but it doesn't matter. You know, Production values are mostly for teenage boys who go to see movies and like to be wowed with the stuff on the screen. I'm interested in the storyline and all that. So Firefly, the movie, and is the movie called
Something else.
Firefly, or do they give the movie another name?
I believe it's a different name. Yeah, I can't remember though.
I can't remember what it is.
Isn't that the one where they swear in Mandarin?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Exactly correct.
Okay, let's see. Let's look for one other good one here. Uh, sorry, give me a second. If you needed to move your personal gold or silver to another country, what's the best way to do it?
Two ways you can do it. One is gradually, a few coins at a time if you're going to travel enough. And that's one reason why I suggest you don't use 1 ounce coins, which when they go through the machines almost everywhere now, you will be questioned to see if they're gold. So I've explained, I found this out a number of places with silver 1 ounce coins, which were no problem. But if they'd been gold, which is what they were looking for, would have been a problem. So if you're going to gradually travel across borders, use 1/4 ounce coins, which look like small change, that just junk that people throw in their briefcases or whatever. Number one, but that's not serious money. Serious money, you've got to do it legally. And that means you can go to an organization like Brinks, I guess, is one, and they'll ship your gold anywhere. And you got to deal with the customs and uh, regulations when you get to the country. I mean, who knows? Various countries prohibit, have taxes, whatever. Check that out, and I'd have an organization like that do it for you.
And in some circumstances, it could make sense just to. It depends on what taxes and stuff like that. Just to, because gold is so liquid, you could sell your gold in one country and then repurchase it in another one. Because sometimes it's easier to move those dollars, internationally, wire them versus having to have to ship something very heavy around the world.
That's true, but a lot of countries, there's just not a real market for gold and silver. You might want to buy it, but from whom? There's no market.
Interesting. Okay.
Like there used to be a market in Argentina for gold coins, but the Kirchners shut that down. So,
I didn't know that. Okay. Let's see. Let's see if there's last question. Do you have any opinion about what it means that Bill Gates is like the largest farm holder in the U.S. Like, does it mean anything to you? Is anything nefarious in that, in your opinion?
I think when you've got $80 billion, um, and when he started buying this land, I mean, agricultural prices were half what they are right now. Soybeans were half anyway. So, hey, when you got all that capital, you got to deploy it somehow. So I think I don't think there's anything necessarily nefarious. It's just a question, what do you do with all that money? You buy something cheap.
Right.
And it was cheap when he started doing it.
Hmm.
It's not now. It's gone up a lot.
Well, and I mean, with that much capital, you end up owning a lot of almost every category of anything you can imagine, right? That's a huge amount of capital that you're trying to deploy and grow.
Yeah, exactly. It's just too bad that Gates is apparently such a criminal mind.
He's definitely got a God complex. That seems certain.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
That's right. With that unassuming pastel cashmere sweater that he always wears, it's tries to be disarming. But
definitely
I'm
not.
I'm glad Melinda wound up with half his fortune, although she's probably no better, probably as bad or worse than he is. Who knows?
You gotta assume, decades together, you kind of must have a lot more in common than not.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Anyway,
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for today, Doug. Thanks very much for your time. We'll be back next week. And if you guys have questions for Doug, the best thing to do is join our Telegram channel where I solicit those questions, and then we really get through as many as we can. We definitely have probably 15 or 20 unanswered questions this time, but we we do try and plow through them. If you want to submit them, that's the best way to do it. All right.
anyway,
Thank you, Doug.
these questions are kind of fun because they're nice jumping off points for a conversation in different areas.
That's
So
right. I
I enjoy
mean, it is a lot easier to respond to some of the inquiries, and it also helps us make sure that we're actually responding to the things or delivering content basically that people are actually interested in hearing based upon their actual concerns or worries or whatever. So it's more fun, I think, in many ways. Okay.
Have a good weekend, Matt.
Thanks, Doug. You too. Take care.